So, welcome. This is the first of what I hope will be a series of conversations about creativity in all its forms with people who are really experts in their field. So, I'm delighted to be joined by Zig. Hello, Zig. How are you?
Hey, yeah, really well. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thanks so much for doing this. You're the first one. I won't say the guinea pig because that's belittling. I'm just
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
really excited to speak with you.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I just to put some background into this. So I do some creative workshops as part of my portfolio, and one of the things I do is run an orchestra. Let's call it an orchestra for people recovering from addiction. And I found out that you did the same, and so I came up to observe you, and you were in the Guildhall School of Music at the time, which has been an institution to which you've been attached for much of your career. And you were running this fantastic project that also had a social angle to it. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that to start with?
Yeah. I mean, I have pretty much dedicated my entire professional life to working with sort of within engagement, if you like. So leading creative work in a whole variety of different environments. But the yeah, my time with the Messengers. The Messengers is the group that you met.
Immediately it says funk, right? I hope people are thinking funk because it was deeply funky. Did you always imagine it would be something that had a kind of a funk groove to it, or
I
no?
really didn't know what to expect. I mean, I guess my collaborator, who has been with me throughout this entire journey, Guy Wood, he sort of obviously would have brought a certain dimension to it because he is a drummer, a fantastic drummer at
He's
that.
amazing.
Really is the heart of the band. I basically just knew that we were going to do a project with St. Mungo's Homeless Charity.
Mhm.
We booked a space, Fellows Court Community Hall in Hackney.
Yeah.
Booked that for a 3-day project. We had 5 students involved from the Guildhall, from the Leadership Masters program. And I asked Guy to come along as my collaborator. And we just brought a whole bunch of instruments to the venue. I'd never worked in this area. I'd worked with adults in different environments, and obviously my training and teaching at the Guildhall, I'd worked with grown-ups, with professional musicians, but never with a homeless community.
Mm.
Like for every project that you start, when you go into a new area that you haven't explored before, there is a bit of butterflies and everything, and I had no idea what to expect.
When was this? Did you mention that earlier?
In the Messengers did their first performance, I think it was in either 2012 or 2013. So I guess
Okay.
that was in February, and we did the first project in the October before. I think the gig was probably in 2013, and the band therefore met in October 2012. So it's not that long actually, but it has had a profound impact on my career certainly, and I never thought. Obviously, you never know whatever anything is going to lead to,
Mm.
but this little 3-day project has changed a lot
It's
for me.
changed your kind of rationale as a creative workshop leader in a way, from what I understand.
It's just kind of it's expanded so much. Obviously, the context is so fascinating, and so it really does challenge assumptions when you go in there. When you sort of obviously, I come from Iceland originally, where homelessness is quite hidden. It exists, but it's definitely not sort of in your face like in some other areas where you go to.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know. It's That's a part of kind of moving to a big city, is that you kind of get exposed to these sides of society, and like probably most people, I was quite sort of intimidated by it, or they say that we we become quite conditioned in how we deal with vulnerable people, like people that are obviously vulnerable and going through a hard time, like the homeless, like the beggars. That there is a researched sort of thing that happens to us, that when we meet any new person, there's a certain chemical change in our body, in our
Really?
bodies that
Chemical?
that we try to kind of empathize with the person, and we try to kind of build a connection. And adults have learned to switch that off when they see misery, when they see people that are in this position, when people are sat outside the shops or the cash points or something and begging, and sort of that. It's so uncomfortable, it's so confronting that we have unknowingly, we have switched off this sort of ability.
Right.
Really significant. And that's, it has really working and getting to really know people that have that story has profoundly changed my outlook on that.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of, and just really brought to the foreground how we compartmentalize everybody, that everybody kind of fits within a box somehow, and we associate and work with certain people and we don't with others. Why is that? Why would we not? It's so mad.
It is mad. And I think what was lovely about observing your workshop, and I noticed a similar thing with the Recovery Orchestra in Bristol, is that when they come into the room, they are musicians, and that is their primary identity. It's not the other stuff, not primarily. And that is, obviously a very empowering thing, and it's a democratizing thing. And I one of the things I immediately admired about what I saw with you is how you held the space. Now, when I said the words "held the space" to a fellow musician just across the road, you said, "Yeah, I think I know what you mean, but what do you mean exactly?" So I wonder, could you put some words on what it means for you to sort of hold a positive space for this kind of cross-community work?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably one of the most important aspects of facilitating this kind of work, of working in this way, that you are working with people at many different sort of places in their lives, in their sort of creativity, in their musical skill, whatever it is, that people are coming from many different directions. And your role is to create an environment where everybody feels comfortable, where everybody feels that they have something to offer, that everybody feels that they are heard and they are valued members of this collective. At the same time, you are building something together. You are building a creative entity. There's something that is going to be in existence after you finish your work, something that wasn't there before. So you, as the leader of that, you need to kind of have many different plates spinning at the same time. It has to be a positive environment. That's not a bonus. It just is an absolute requirement that you need to have an element of fun and excitement and just sort of positive communication in that space. And it's your job to kind of also ensure that the artistic quality is at a level that everybody feels proud of having been a part of the process. So you're working as an artist in this environment. You're working as a teacher in some elements. You're working as an arrangement. In terms of like the musical concepts, you are an arranger and a commissioner of creative work. You send people out of the room and you trust that they will come with something back, with something that you will then incorporate. And you're a performer. You are a leader in sort of like an artistic sense, but also in the kind of social sense as well. That you are kind of holding a lot, but you need to be able to just relax with it as well and have fun with it as well, and be a member of that community. And so there is it's a fine balancing act, and it's quite hard to kind of teach, I guess, except through kind of demonstration, and you're kind of setting up. I sort of, in my work as a teacher, obviously I work in higher education, and I try to kind of break away from the kind of manual of this is what you have to do, but rather just sort of share some qualities and a sense of this ethos of approaching every person with the same amount of respect. the same kind of regard for their input, and that you kind of more through that and kind of trying to help people to discover their own way of doing that. My way of doing that is I love leading big bands with a rhythm section and all of that. That's really what I love. But I equally love working with vocal groups with no instruments at all, and kind of working in an a cappella environment, and also just breaking away from the groove completely, and working with sound and mood and all of that. That's, I guess, I can't even remember what your original question was, James, but just in terms of what the artistic stimulation that I get from all of that as well is what keeps me going with it, I guess.
The original question, which you've answered beautifully, was how do you put words on what it is to hold the space as a sort of workshop leader? And I think you've touched on all those manifold areas that you do have to juggle and hold in both creative tension but do so, as you say, in a positive, calm way. And one of the core differences between our models in terms of the orchestras we run with that particular community is, I suppose, you're working with really talented students and professionals. Whereas in my situation, it's purely that community. I'm the only professional in the space. Now I can see benefits of both models, but I have to say I'm really envious of yours because it immediately sounds great. There's this inspirational kind of groove that immediately springs up, and the ideas that are bouncing around the walls are inspiring to you as a workshop leader as much as to everybody else in the room. So that must be very fulfilling.
Yeah. And that's not always the case. Like I don't always have a band with me.
No. Well, say more about that. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear.
I am often the only professional in the room as well.
What do you notice then when that is the case? How does things shift in terms of involvement, say, of the other people in the space?
I don't know how greatly it shifts, and how I mean the outcome will be different, but in terms of, I don't know, my method, if you like, it's always about responding to what happens in the room. So whatever happens in the room is what we work with. So I mean, I've set up as one of the outcomes of that initial Messengers project back in the day was that I've now set up my own community interest company that basically creates bands and runs bands with vulnerable communities. So we have a band in Leicester, and we have a band in Los Angeles. We have 5 bands in Iceland. So
what a lovely sentence to say. We got Los Angeles, 5 in Iceland. I mean, the immediate thing that comes to mind is what difference do you notice across the different cultures? Where do you find it almost most natural and easiest to make the kind of music you want to make, just out of interest?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think the greatest difference is kind of, it's more just, it's not based on a geography or any one of the groups. Basically, the groups that I work with are working with, in Iceland particularly, is we're working with adults in recovery, so people that are in recovery from a whole range of different events, I guess, and sort of challenges. So I collaborate with occupation rehabilitation centres.
Oh, that's interesting. So you have that professional partnership as part of your model.
I always do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely what I would say is a part of what I would always do. That I work with professionals that have different skill sets than I do. And so in Iceland, I work with these incredible organizations that basically catch people before it gets to a very, very bad place. I mean, it gets to a bad enough place, in my opinion. But people that have suffered from very similar events and challenges that the homeless community here have. So obviously unemployment, mental health issues, addiction, coming out of offending, sort of young offenders or prison community,
a whole mix
and
of
all of
issues.
that. And so it's very similar. But it could also be just people suffering burnout, professionals that had really stressful jobs and just burned out because of all of that.
Particularly common, in the recovery community that you get.
There, all of that, and so I work with these communities, and they have these organisations, and there are different timelines. So people come into the program, and depending on where they're at, they could be seeking support from these organisations for maybe 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, or even longer. So if it just happens that a project with one of these bands is when a lot of people are new, then that could be a really, really challenging environment to work in. Because if there are no sort of pre-existing relationships within the group, so everybody's coming into this, and when you enter something like this, you are at a very low point in your life. So people are tremendously vulnerable. There is a very low sort of level of trust going on. People don't feel like putting themselves out there. And I will never forget, like, the first project that I led with these organizations was in my hometown.
Right.
So in a town of 20,000 people, which is like big in Iceland, Icelandic sort of scale of things. And my nephew is one of my core collaborators out there. He's a wonderful musician, pianist and a composer. So we went into this room, and I'd never seen this side of my hometown before. So I come into the room, and I immediately go like, okay, so I know this environment. I have been in these environments in different countries, but I've never seen this side of my own environment, like my own, where my roots are from.
It's a real discovery journey for you as well.
So eye-opening, absolutely. And then it was one of these situations where you kind of ask a question, and there's dead silence.
Right, tough crowd.
Nobody answered, nobody get, and it was so stressful. It was like, I don't know if I'm going to make this work. And we did. We really, really gradually got something going. But
talk about that from a musical perspective, because I'm sure people want to know, what your experiences were in getting people's confidence going, getting some musical thoughts flowing.
Yeah. So in this situation, it was me and my nephew. He's a keyboardist, and so he had his keyboard set up and an amplifier. And I choose to kind of use my voice more and percussion and things like that, so that I'm really available to everybody there. And there was no way we were going to get them making any music. We tried a bit of a warm-up, standing in a circle. It was like,
Really? People really close down?
Really, like just standing. I mean, if you think about it, standing in a circle is really quite exposing. Everybody can see you. And you see everybody, and people are sort of like, it's so, you're quite vulnerable standing in a circle. So we didn't do that. Well, we tried that, and we abandoned that very swiftly. But then I thought, words, that's where we can start. So we started just with a brainstorm. The project was happening at the same time as a festival. They call it the Festival of, or like a Light Night or something like that in Iceland. So it's in September. They are just about to light the sort of the beacons that light up a cliff that goes out into the ocean. And the obviously in the summertime it never gets dark in Iceland, so it's light 24 hours. But this is an event to kind of, now the darkness is coming, and we light up the beacon. So light was our inspiration. That was the word, and just the changing of the light. We did a whole brainstorm exercise on that. Started with the words, started writing poems together, and then just the sort of little twist of, okay, so how might we sing this first line?
So you snuck it in. You snuck it in, led by the words. Right.
And trying to keep very matter of fact about that it's not like you know, if you approach something as a scary thing, and you kind of prepare the group, okay, now everybody relax, we're just going to do a bit of singing. Nobody will sing. But if you sort of go as that's obviously, so we've been writing these little words, and okay, so how do we sing that?
Right.
and it's just the natural next step in the process.
And
from that
working
with somebody like Saevarsdóttir, that he can really find amazing chords to go with it and make anything sound good. So that's a good combo to have.
Isn't it though? And I think, having someone who can give that 3D effect with a really decent chord progression, that's a real gift. Talking of gifts, I mean, you mentioned your singing, and I thought, wow, I loved how you were able just to capture what was going on in the room just in your voice. And you seem to have an exquisite musical memory, because these phrases, particularly going back to the messengers now, that were being chucked out by Guildhall students and pros, they were quite complex. It was quite a lot of information going on, and they could be 5 bars of 12/8 or crazy time signatures happening. And you seem to be able to replicate that. I mean, yes, you had your iPhone there as well to capture stuff, but is that something you've always had, or is that musical memory something you've deliberately worked on?
I think I've always had a good ear, but the memory is definitely something that I developed after starting working this way. I remember from sort of early projects where you'd be sent off with a group to come up with something, and then you make it, and then you come back to the room to share it, and you're like, how did it go again? So I've definitely been there. But it's, 20 plus years of doing this work, and that's really developed. The phone is helping a lot as well, just to capture how exactly it went. But I think it's interesting just thinking about how complex things can be, and sort of just in terms of your ear to capture things when they happen, that I think it can be absolutely equally tricky when working with very young children.
That's true.
They're never going to sing to you again what they sang.
No.
But if you liked what you heard the first time, you've got to catch it immediately.
Boom, it's got to be there, isn't it? Yes. Yeah.
And then it's also because they will maybe try to kind of correct things to make them fit better or something, but they might come up with something really unusual and beautiful that you want to hold on to.
Yeah.
So if you like that, you've just got to have quite a good ear, and memory is really useful.
It's a key part to that, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love how you tweaked things to make them more curious and attractive musically as well. I remember there was quite a sort of a square set melody. It could have been 4/4, and you took out a beat, or I think in another instance, you kind of added something, and it was taking the basis of somebody's idea, but just tweaking it. So, we've gone into a 5/4, but we don't have to worry about that kind of thing. Is that a deliberate technique as well?
Yeah, and try to kind of sort of, shake it up a little bit, or make it something that you wouldn't necessarily kind of think of, or just to kind of get something interesting, something more juicy going.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you notice yourself ending up finding the same kind of material? Is that because of the collaborations involved, or?
Yeah, I've thought about that. Obviously, I've got thousands of recordings now from projects. Obviously, I wish I had recording devices before phones. I never recorded anything before then. So, but I've often thought about that, just kind of going back through my kind of archive and analyzing, are there kind of commonalities through it? I don't think so. I'm not knowingly going it's one of these songs that I always make.
You always do, and it's that interval, or it's that groove, or.
Maybe it is something in the shape of melodies that I might suggest, or something like that. But I tend to not bring anything to start pieces off, so there is not a risk of me kind of reusing this bass line or whatever. It's because I don't do that anymore.
No.
I just start from what happens in the room, but it's probably, if I analyze the music, that it go okay, so here's clearly a Sig opening of a melody.
right. I can feel a PhD project going on. If anybody's out there that you want to analyse Sig's backlog.
I've got my phone, you can analyse.
Well, there you go. Creative identity as it emerges across time.
Yeah.
I mean, that presumes, doesn't it, that we're always after newness and originality in the first place, which I guess you're not, as long as it feels new to the majority of people in the room, that's, I suppose, the most important thing. I mean, is it important to have something fresh and original all the time?
I mean, I'm not like reinventing the wheel. I'm not like drastically changing how you structure a song or anything like that. But I think it will always be like if you make something, it's new to you. Like I don't mind if we use like chord progressions that might have been used in another song. It's never going to be that other song because we're doing something with it. So I'm not kind of policing that. It's like, no, we couldn't possibly use this because Paul Simon did or whatever. Like it's not like that.
Yeah.
But it will always be, and I think one of the really exciting things for me creatively is that the outcome will never be something that I could have sat down and created myself.
Yeah.
How could it be? If there are 5 people or 10 people or 50 people making something together, it won't ever be something that one of us could have made. And that's so exciting, isn't it?
That's the beauty of it, isn't it? Yeah, thinking how the emergent is always going to be greater than the sum of the parts in a sense, and surprising. I want you to describe what your favourite combination of instruments is in the place. If you had a kind of a blue sky scenario, what has to be in the space, or what do you most enjoy working with, just sonically?
I've had a lot of harps on projects over the last
few
years, even.
Really?
Like having never had a harp. There was a harpist at the Guildhall. Once we had 2 harpists on a project, on a messages project.
You lucky thing. Wow.
Mad. And now in Iceland, I'm working with the Icelandic Symphony Orchestra. They're harp players on.
Great.
I just did a project with my band in Leicester, and the Philharmonia was involved. There was a harp player involved in that. So I just seem to have a lot of harps.
That's creative harp players.
It's amazing. It's such an incredible sound.
Yeah.
And they're so good. Like, they're just incredible players. But I don't know, like, also a graduate of the course who thankfully is back in the UK. Well, he's probably actually still in Palestine right now because of lockdown, but has got an exceptional artist visa. Saeed Silbak is an oud player, Palestinian. Oh my gosh. And he is like a virtuosic player.
I'd love to hear that.
Really exciting. I don't know. I love playing with and working with just the mixture of instruments, but I mean...
You're talking of instruments there that are acoustic and perhaps have a folk sound to them, or at least that capacity. Is that some...
nice, isn't it? There's that kind of colour that you bring into it, which is really exciting. And then working with... Sorry, I interrupted you, but working with maybe the more kind of traditional instruments, but with that element, it will always sound different and unique.
We need spice. I couldn't agree more. I love the thought of that. Do you enjoy working with world music styles generally? Does that give you, I suppose, a wider palette to choose from?
Yeah, and I'm a real sucker for rhythms. I love different rhythms and tricky rhythms as well.
Go on, give us an example. Give us an example.
That's hard. I don't know, just like when I first came here and started discovering more of the sort of African rhythms, the bembeys and all of the kind of the 12/8 feel. You can hear it in so many different ways, but depending on where you put the pulse. If you're playing off the triplets or if you're putting the straight beat on it, and
I love that.
Layers of all of that, and I love odd time signatures, the 5s and the 7s. I really like that, and just I remember there were 2 Tanzanian musicians on my year on the course, and also just I retold this story to somebody that I was working with the other day about just a really eye-opening moment for me, that we were sort of sat in a circle, just my year group, and so we were. The task was to kind of each of us to come up with something that we would teach the rest of the group. And this incredible djembe player, Cassius Mananga, made something that was so complicated, and we were trying to, me and Tim Steiner was teaching the class.
Right.
We had this heated argument. I said it was an 11, and he said it was in 11 and a half. And I remember saying to Cassius, which is it? Is it 11 or 11 and a half? And he just paused and looked at me for a minute, and then he went, it goes like this, and played it to me again. And I thought, of course, why would he doesn't count the beats in the way that we count the beats.
No.
It doesn't make any difference to him.
You just got to feel it, right?
11 or 11 and a half or 13 or whatever it is. It goes like this.
Mm.
And just this moment of me going like, why do I have to have it within, why does it have to fit within a particular box for me to be able to engage with it? It doesn't matter. Just listen and get into it. And I kind of used that with the big band that I started back in February in Iceland that I just referred to, where the symphony orchestra harp player is.
Yeah.
That I came up with something just playing on an imbira. I just played it into the microphone, and it happened to be in 5/8. And people were kind of, some members of the group were struggling with it, and I could see by people's tapping of the foot that they weren't feeling it anywhere close to where it was.
Right.
Tapping of the foot was really getting into people's, in their way of feeling it.
Mm.
And I just did a bit of a sort of a mindfulness exercise of just take your instruments away, just breathe a little bit, and here it is, and just listen to it. Just enjoy hearing it. Don't try to make sense of it.
Yeah.
Don't try to understand it. Don't try to visualize how you would write it. None of that makes any difference.
Mm.
Just feel it. And that really sort of helped to relax it a little bit. And then obviously people understood it and were able to engage with it on that front as well.
So counter-instinctive to the classically trained, isn't it? Not to want to make some kind of visual sense. I mean, that said, do you work with manuscript and sort of write down ideas and notate stuff, or do graphic notation so that people in the room can have some kind of framework or guide when that helps them? Or do you try to avoid that for the reasons you've just been talking about?
I don't necessarily try to avoid it, but it just isn't a tool that I use very often. Very occasionally I would, especially working with people that need that or feel that gives them security. Then I encourage people to take their own notes and just to record. I especially do that when I'm working with teachers. I do a training course in Iceland every summer for teachers working in mainstream education. And I used to spend a lot of time on like making info packs for people for those kinds of projects and to have notated the songs that I was going to use and all of that. And then eventually I just stopped doing that because I think there is so much value in you remembering things for yourself and to write your own kind of description of what happens, because each person will sort of experience things slightly differently. And I think it's good that people have their own kind of interpretation of processes, that people, I would much rather that they would record the songs, us in this group, this community that's never going to meet together in this exact formation, remember the song through recording that and reliving that moment, because I think the page just gets in the way of that.
I experienced that actually coming back from your workshop, coming full circle to the opening experience, because what was interesting was how sticky the tune was. Or one of the tunes just stuck like an earworm.
What do you mean sticky?
Sticky, it's like, it was there. I couldn't get rid of it. It was in a positive way, because then I can confess to you that I think the following week I was just doing a creative workshop with the pre-conservatoire students, so, gifted students, and I was thinking, okay, so let's come up with a starting point, and unbidden, this tune from your workshop came into my fingers. Like, this is so good, let's go with this. But what surprised me was that when we put our trust into that process and we actually believe that we can remember the material, then it's actually quite surprising, isn't it, what sticks? Yeah,
and sort of quite freeing as well. Just kind of, and so what if you remember it slightly differently?
That's good.
Then that's how it is now.
Yeah.
And it evolves and it's got a life.
Mm.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Do people argue over ownership of their tunes and want acknowledgement of that? Do you find that, particularly among the sort of people who are perhaps newer to the process of making music together, is it more important to them to say, this is my verse or that's my chorus?
Very occasionally. And it became very problematic in the messengers at one point. So obviously, like I said at the start, I was really new to this environment, and there was a very dominating person that joined the project. Not a collaborator in any sense, but brought these incredible masterpieces of work. He was not musically trained himself, so his notes initially would be pages and pages of written text.
Yeah,
just
really written,
complete small. Written and all kind of, I don't know, it made sense to him, but it would not have made sense to Edwin if you'd passed it on to anyone else. And he would just basically direct the band, but not being particularly mindful of the sort of vibe in the room.
So you had to coach him into a more collaborative space.
And just very, very very strongly leading it. And it became very problematic because that was his composition, and the band just had to endure that process in order for him to kind of get to that place, and then the rest would be the band's music. And in the end, we just set an absolute rule, which we still stick to, and is across the board with all of the bands of Metamorphonics, is that everything gets created in the room. Nobody brings anything, but that can be accredited more to this person or another person. We make everything here together.
That's a beautiful vision, and I feel a good one on which to end. You just mentioned the name of your community interest company there. Just tell us a little bit more about that and where people can find out more about it.
Yeah, so it's called Metamorphonics, and it is, obviously it's based here in London where I am.
Mm-hmm.
But it's sort of all sprung from the Messengers. We have another band, like a satellite band from the Messengers called Visions. Mm-hmm. I'm really glad to say that Visions has its first project for 2 years now since the pandemic and various different changes. So
Great.
The first project is going to happen in May, and that's in collaboration with Single Homeless Project, which is a new collaborator for me. I'm really excited about that. And we're hoping to be able to recruit a couple of people from that band into the Messengers for our next performance. And the Messengers are hopefully performing at the Waterloo Festival in June, end of June.
Come on, COVID, get out of the way.
A band in Leicester as well called Roll Call.
Mm-hmm.
And Roll Call is delivered in collaboration with the Montfort University and 2 charities in Leicester. Dear Albert, which is a sort of recovery centre for addicts, and the Centre Project, which caters for vulnerable people in the centre of town. We have a band in Los Angeles in collaboration with the University of Southern California and Thornton School of Music. We were meant to be doing a project this spring, and obviously that's not happening.
Well, if they need specifically a workshop leader to deputise who's has black framed glasses and might have called Jonathan or has 2 J's. If they ever need that, I'm just saying that might be interesting.
I'll tell them that. I'll write to them and say
nothing to do with the California bit at all. Obviously, just And then you've got the Iceland side of things that you mentioned before. It's all under the auspices of Metamorphonics. Can people find about that on a website somewhere?
Yeah, we have a website, metamorphonics.co.uk. So, and we've got a page for all of the bands, and you can listen to examples of their songs and read a little bit about them and some about our sort of ethos and what we do and who our leaders are. We have a fantastic team of leaders, and that's where it's all at.
It's such an inspiring and broad vision, and it's looking as if it's sort of growing of its own accord. So I wish you and your team so much luck in that. So thanks
Thank you
so
so
much for
much.
joining me in this first pioneering conversation. And
Pleasure.
yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.